Philosophy is not a way of life. Every person does not have his or her own philosophy. Philosophy is not simply a theory about something. Nor is philosophy a belief or a wish. Philosophy is an activity, a quest after wisdom. Philosophy is an activity of thought. Philosophy is a particular unique type of thought or style of thinking. Philosophy is not to be confused with its product. What a philosopher provides is a body of philosophic thought, not a philosophy. A philosopher enacts a philosophy, a quest after wisdom. Philosophy is not a picking and choosing what body of thought one would like to call one's own or would like to believe in, a choice based upon personal preferences or feelings. Philosophy is a pursuit. One can choose to be philosophical. One can choose to be a philosopher. One cannot choose a philosophy. Philosophy, insofar as it may be correlated at all to a way of life, is a form of thinking meant to guide action or to prescribe a way of life. The philosophic way of life, if there is one, is displayed in a life in which action is held to be best directed when philosophical reflection has provided that direction. For example, Socrates, the paradigm of a philosopher. Philosophy is an activity of thought, a type of thinking. Philosophy is critical and comprehensive thought, the most critical and comprehensive manner of thinking which the human species has yet devised. This intellectual process includes both an analytic and synthetic mode of operation. Philosophy as a critical and comprehensive process of thought involves resolving confusion, unmasking assumptions, revealing presuppositions, distinguishing importance, testing positions, correcting distortions, looking for reasons, examining worldviews and questioning conceptual frameworks. It also includes dispelling ignorance, enriching understanding, broadening experience, expanding horizons, developing imagination, controlling emotion, exploring values, fixing beliefs by rational inquiry, establishing habits of acting, widening considerations, synthesizing knowledge and questing for wisdom. Philosophy as a process function as an activity which responds to society's demand for wisdom, which is bringing together all that we know in order to obtain what we value. Viewed in this way, philosophy is part of the activity of human growth and thus an integral, essential part of the process of education. Philosophy and education have as a common goal the development of the total intellect of a person, the realization of the human potential. Life is the aspect of existence that processes, acts, reacts, evaluates, and evolves through growth. The crucial difference between life and non-life or non-living things is that life uses energy for physical and conscious development. Life is anything that grows and eventually dies, i.e., ceases to proliferate and be cognizant. Can we say that viruses, for example, are cognizant? Yes, insofar as they react to stimuli, but they are alive essentially because they reproduce and grow. Computers are non-living because even though they can cognize, they do not develop biologically, grow, and cannot produce offspring. It is not cognition that determines life, then. It is rather proliferation and maturation towards a state of death, and death occurs only to living substances. Or is the question, what is the meaning, purpose, of life? That's a real tough one. But I think that the meaning of life is the ideals we impose upon it, what we demand of it. I've come to reaffirm my Boy Scout motto, give or take a few words, that the meaning of life is to do good, be good, but also to receive good. The foggy term in this advice, of course, is good, but I leave that to the intuitive powers that we all share. There are, of course, many intuitively clear examples of doing good, by retrieving a crying baby from a dumpster, by trying to rescue someone who's drowning. Most of us would avoid murdering, and most of us would refrain from other acts we find intuitively wrong. So our natural intuitions determine the meaning of life for us, and it seems for other species as well, for those intuitions resonate through much of life and give it its purpose. What is your philosophy of life? According to Mark Twain, philosophy of life. The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time. What if you went into an interview and someone asked you, what is your philosophy of life? How easily could you answer that question? By philosophy of life I mean a mental framework for understanding how the world works and how you fit into the world. The philosophy of life would include things like how you decide what is good and bad, what success means, what your purpose in life is, including if you don't think there is a purpose, whether there is a God, how we should treat each other, etc. There are many names you might be used to label your philosophy of life: libertarian, feminist, liberal, conservative, Buddhist, Christian, entrepreneur, artist, environmentalist, Tea Party, and any number of others. Maybe you feel you could summarize your philosophy of life with one of those words, but for most of us I'd suspect that our actual philosophies of life are more complex and nuanced. They are not so easily boxed in. If we sat down in an interview, could you explain yours? Knowing what I do about you as a group of readers, I'd guess I could divide you into 3 groups. The first group has a clear philosophy of life that you have thought through in depth, have tested, and use regularly and explicitly for guiding your actions. I'll call you the True North group. You have a compass for life and you know which direction is the right way, the true north. If I asked about your philosophy of life, you could explain it to me immediately, cogently, and concisely from the top of your head. You may not be able to give it a one-word label, but you have thought it through and could explain why your philosophy of life makes sense to you and how it governs your thinking. I would guess this is the smallest group of the 3. The second group are those of you who have a loosely organized philosophy of life in which things basically hang together, but which you couldn't summarize quickly from the top of your head. If I gave you a little more time, you could come up with an overarching framework that covers most things, though the fringes and the corner cases of life would remain gray. I will call you the Dusty Compass group. It's like you have a compass for directing your life, but you forget to use it. You have a roughly coherent system for understanding the world, and you pretty much know it intuitively, but most of the time you don't explicitly use it to filter and direct your experience. The compass lies on the shelf collecting dust. When you eventually pull it out, you see it's gotten a little wacky and you need to recalibrate it. My guess is that this experience describes the largest group of people. The third group I will call the inbox group. For the inbox group I'm abandoning the compass metaphor because if you are in this group, you do not actually have a governing magnetic orientation for what life is about and where you are going. Life may be about something, heck, your life may be about something, but you don't know. You're too busy to think about it. Your approach is just to deal with what is coming at you, the way you manage email. People and companies constantly send you messages to direct your attention and you basically follow their lead. Why are you watching that new Netflix show? Why are you listening to that new Kanye song? Why did you decide to be a surgeon anyway? You don't really know. Or you think you know, but the reasons turn out to be pretty superficial. I think this is likely the second biggest group, though it might be the biggest. The difference between members of these 3 groups is almost entirely internal. You wouldn't be able to pick them out on the street. But their internal experience of life will be entirely different. One man plays squash because he has a true north philosophy about pushing himself to his limits, maintaining his health and investing in friendships with his playing partners. Another may value these same things but couldn't articulate them. He just knows he likes to play. A third has no real reason for playing other than someone asked him to. Maybe he just wants to be seen at the racket club. Maybe he just likes being asked. The external action of chasing a ball around a court is the same, but the internal motivation and experience is totally different. In general, I think it is better to live as a member of the True North group. I say in general because there are exceptions. Some people have clear, explicit life philosophies, but locking in those ideas has made them narrow on curious thinkers, who are a little too arrogant that they've figured it all out. For the most part, however, I think it is healthy to have a comprehensive framework for life and to live in line with it. True North is the way to go, provided you remain humble, curious, and open to the possibility you may be wrong. The alternative, of being in the Dusty Compass group or the Inbox group, is to not have an orienting vision for your life. It means you are constantly at risk of forgetting what you are about, no getting what life is about and steering off course, i.e., wasting your time. Death is the great leveler for these groups. You might be in the Dusty Compass group or the Inbox group most of the time, but when you brush near death, your own death or the death of someone you care about, your philosophy of life has a way of getting clearer. The experience of nearness to death acts as a jolt that prompts you to yearn to be in the true north group, to live, as it were, on purpose, to make it count. You may have had someone guide you through the exercise of thinking about what your obituary will say when you die. For many of us, it is an arresting exercise because, if we are honest, the way we are spending our time isn't totally in line with what we want our lives to be about. Realizing that fact is like waking from a daydream. For many of us, when we come near death, the experience moves us closer to the true north group and away from what Paul Graham describes as the things life is too short for. In the face of mortality, we think hard about what matters, and the things that come to mind are no surprise: family, friendships, treating people well, learning, keeping our health. We promise ourselves that those things will be our priority. And we actually begin to live more in line with our aspirations. But the weeks and the months go by, and slowly, imperceptibly to us, but almost inevitably, we drift back to distraction. We look at the compass less frequently. We just deal with what is coming at us. We don't completely forget what is important to us, but we figure we can get to it later. We don't completely forget what we think life is all about, but the notion becomes less clear, less poignant, like an old photograph faded by the sun. Without the vivid orienting direction of a clear philosophy of life, it becomes easy to do whatever's easiest instead of living the way we'd want our obituaries to read. I like to think I'm a true north guy, but honestly, the reality is I probably am a dusty compass with momentary leaps up into true north territory. That's why I find remarkable those souls who somehow maintain a consistency of philosophy, and who live in line with it. They are remarkable because it is hard to live with character. It is hard to live as if life won't go on forever. And it's why, every now and again, I find that reflecting on the reality of death is one of the best things I can do to make the most of the reality of my life. Script we consciously choose to be informed by. Have you created your second script? Have you decided to live according to that second script? Or have your prior experiences conditioned you to expect that things will just never work out, or that they'll be easy, or that you should do your best to limit all risk in your life? Many of us are byproducts of a first script that says, my quality of life is a direct result of my circumstances. How reductive, untrue, and limiting. Many of us have employed that very philosophy, and our poor quality of life isn't a result of our circumstances, but of that poor philosophy. Hear that. Your quality of life is not a result of your circumstances, but your perception of those circumstances. Remember what Shakespeare said, nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Now, I want to take a second and be really real. Some of us had terrible circumstances growing up. Single parents, absent parents, financial disadvantage, exposure to abuse or addiction, etc. Don't mishear me. Those are deeply unfortunate circumstances, and you should do your absolute best to remove yourself from them as soon as you are able to. If you grew up in a toxic environment, never return to it. That is, unless you can help that environment in a way that doesn't damage your psyche. The problem of circumstance I'm talking about, though, is when those situations, that first script, continue to negatively dictate how you pursue your life once you've become self-sufficient. At this point, you are the only person responsible for your life, for its quality, for its meaning. It's just you. Personally, it wasn't until I stopped resenting my parents for their absence that I really experienced a breakthrough. But remember this: it doesn't matter if your parents were present, or absent, or if you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth or literally on the streets. What matters is that you were born. Via whatever circumstances, you were born. Because of that, you have an obligation to live a life in such a way that people who come after you are glad you lived. I'm not saying you have to be prolific, but I am saying that you have to live a life that honors you and those around you. Let's break that down. A life that honors you is one in which you're living up to the potential that your giftings and efforts have set forth. A life that honors others is one in which you're regularly taking opportunities to love and serve, calling friends, putting in that extra effort at work, lending a helping hand to someone who needs it. Put simply and cheesily, own your corner of the sky and light it up. Pursue people, and pursue what you're good at where your abilities and opportunities meet. We're alive, we're breathing, and thus, we are responsible. If there is breath in you, persist, a wise person once said. And persist as well we can. That's a philosophy of life worth choosing. The philosophy of thinking was defined by Epictetus. So, what oppresses and scares us? It is our own thoughts, obviously. A popular adage is the idea that the quality of one's life is the quality of one's relationships. While the value of connection and its role in our flourishing should not be diminished, the statement gives way to an externalization of our contentment, positing that its attainment rests not only on a factor outside of us, but on one known to be in a continual state of flux. Relationships change, evolve, stagnate, dissipate. We change, evolve, stagnate, dissipate. If this is true, the notion that our contentment hinges solely on the state of our connection to others at any given moment, for our sake, can't be. What becomes significant, then, is the ability to effectively process life's transitions in a way that recognizes them as natural, both susceptible to our influence and to elements beyond it. It's for this reason that we can confidently anchor in the following: the quality of our life is the quality of our thinking, or more poignantly, the quality of our ability to refine our thinking. It bears emphasizing that this piece is not about the power of positive thinking, but of the power of thinking in itself, and of the risks posed by not taking an active role in that of our own. English painter Sir Joshua Reynolds is credited with saying that there is no expedient to which a man will not resort to avoid the real labor of thinking. The phrasing carries impact, revealing a defining quality of critical thinking that is us slow to engage it, its perceived laboriousness. It's not so much the function of thinking we're averse to, but the function of challenging it, of choosing to assess its merit further. Many of our judgments are passively formed. From our upbringing and any mentalities instilled, to the media consumed, it could be argued that by a certain point, much of our thinking has been done for us, and thus, we often have to feel sufficiently compelled to adjust it on our own. Philosophy of thinking was defined by Epictetus. Today I escaped the power of circumstance, or rather I cast all circumstance out, for it was not outside me, but within me, in my judgments. As with most naturally occurring functions, it is easier to not challenge our thinking, to not take the time to evaluate whether our default assumptions and interpretations are actually serving us. Implicit throughout Stoic texts is the encouragement of accountability for everything that happens to us by way of owning our thoughts about them. Put another way, what we control in our experiences is how we experience them. Understood in its fullness, our capacity for thinking is the superpower that arms us to adopt the useful perspective in all things. The degree to which we're able to extract the constructive from the destructive can be the difference between a life of reward or resent. Purposeful thinking allows us to decide what we make of any given moment. Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl knew this well. In his renowned memoir Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl tells of his reinforced understanding of self-mastery and the role of choice by way of his 3-year concentration camp imprisonment. Having already dedicated some of his professional life to developing psychological theories anchored in the significance of a rich inner world, subsequent Nazi capture would serve as the most conceivably severe testing ground for these ideas, including that of always having a choice in one's response to their environment, no matter the degree of suffering. In the book, Frankl recounts an experience after imprisonment where someone showed him a photo of prisoners lying around in crowded bunks with dull, exhausted looks. The individual laments the photo, exclaiming what a pity it is. To the individual's surprise, Frankl not only doesn't share the lamentation but questions it, later detailing how the memory for him held an entirely different connotation. We were sick and did not have to leave camp for work, we did not have to go on parade. We could lie all day in our little corner in the hut and doze and wait for the daily distribution of bread which, of course, was reduced for the sick and for the daily helping of soup watered down and also decreased in quantity. But how content we were, happy in spite of everything. He then adds that when he explained this, his or her listeners understood why he or she did not find the photograph so terrible. The people shown on it might not have been so unhappy after all. If the ability to look almost fondly on an image representative of a circumstance so horrific isn't indicative of the power that is refined thinking, we'd be hard-pressed to find an example that is. Few of us will find ourselves in a situation so dire as Viktor Frankl's, and yet we hesitate to challenge ourselves even still. In our avoidance of the labor of thinking lies unconsidered dangers, not least of which the conflating of our own value with the circumstance we're in, or the disempowering act of reducing any individual or group to a single assumption. The passive thinker knows not the consequences perpetuated by unchecked agreement, fearing instead the perceived consequences of dissenting thought, chastisement, exclusion. Just as our function of cognition enables us to think our way past any present pain, so too can it enable us to think beyond rashness, impulse, self-pity, groupthink, and anything else that gives way to harm if left scrutinized. Engaging our capacity for refined thinking may be our most powerful daily act. The well-employed art of thinking is an aid at our side, admonishing or encouraging what's necessary for our good. This aid also prevents us from calling on her superfluously, that is, from thinking too much. Bringing with it a set of different risks. Overthinking yields undesired outcomes as much as underthinking, missed opportunities, unhealthy rumination over possibilities unconfirmed, mental arguments wholly self-developed that take on a detrimental external life, to name a few. Overthinking is not driven by wisdom but anxiety, likely rooted in uncertainty of whatever is or is not presented, or of a failure to assess what is critically necessary in the context of our aim. Thinking deeply is not thinking anxiously. What we're to seek is not excessive, undisciplined thinking, but refined processing aimed at useful outcomes. The virtuous cycle of effective thinking is such that doing it well fosters sensitivity to when we're not. The trained thinker knows when to set herself back on course. The trained thinker also recognizes the inevitability of not always being in the presence of the same. Philosophy of thinking was defined by Marcus Aurelius. Human beings are here for the sake of one another, either instruct them, then, or put up with them. Productive thinking, the autonomous processing of inputs in a manner that yields benefit, requires the acknowledgement of the natural tension that follows when the rational meets the seemingly irrational, or any external factor not apparently aligned to our intent. It requires the observation of the obvious signs and an awareness of the ever-present role of any number of indifferent factors. In discourses and selected writings, slave-turned-teacher Epictetus encourages countering temptation by remembering how much better will be the knowledge that you resisted. Here he describes the future joy that can be drawn upon when one chooses a thoughtful response in the moment, temptation, in this sense, representing the unchallenged acceptance of our initial thoughts. As it bears repeating, our focus is to remain on the choosing, engaging our faculty of discernment to determine how we're going to interpret and respond to any occurrence. A rejection can be a symbol of your unworthiness, or a reminder of the indelible roles of timing, preference, and alignment and of the opportunity to remain ready for when these factors converge. An accident can be the world conspiring against you, or simply another act in the unbiased chaos of life from which you'll arise with deepened appreciation. We temper the blow of chaos when we accept it as our companion, choosing, in all things, to adopt the useful view. Objectively honest as they were, the Stoics never claimed that there would one day be a world without hindrances and challenging personalities, and thus our ability to live contented, productive lives could never be dependent on this. A life of virtue is sufficient in and of itself, and could more so be the case even because of this. As presumed obstacles increase, so too should our character in its ability to free us from unhelpful responses. The developed thinker is one who can productively exist within the tension of their aims and the non-compliant world we occupy, acknowledging dissonance as both unsurprising and sharpening. Epictetus advises that it is not an act of kindness to join our friends in wrong-headed, unhelpful thinking. It is not an act of kindness to join ourselves in this, either. Philosophy of thinking was defined by Marcus Aurelius. Everywhere and all the time it lies within your power to be reverently contented with your present lot, to behave justly to your present neighbors, and to deal skillfully with your present impressions so that nothing may steal into your mind which you have not adequately grasped. Over discussion, we analyze life philosophy. My life philosophy is that you should enjoy every moment of existence and grant others the same right. Since we all make poor decisions, we shouldn't criticize others for their decisions. You should live your life whatever you want as long as it makes you happy and doesn't affect anyone else. Please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment on your personal philosophy of life if you'd want to hear more about the philosophy of luck and the philosophy of death.